NASA now says burning fossil fuels cools the planet. Yes, the question mark and exclamation point are right. What the F? NASA, along with every other major scientific institution in the world, has been telling us for decades that burning fossil fuels increases the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. And as scientists have known for over 120 years, an increase of CO2 causes global warming. And now all of a sudden NASA is telling us it causes cooling. This fact has been brought to us by my old friend Steve Crowder. And the only reason I spotted it is because it was above a tweet of his that someone had told me about, claiming that I declined to come on his show. So before I set the record straight on that, let me deal with this claim first. Regular subscribers to me channel know exactly what to do when a transparently silly claim like this hits the blogosphere. Find out where it comes from, trace it right back to its source, and see how the primary source has been misunderstood or misrepresented along the way. And in this case, starting that trail is as easy as clicking on this link. It comes from the Sunday Express from over a year earlier. The next step is to see where the Express got its information from so we can check it. And it wasn't hard to find out. I simply Googled some of the NASA quotes from the Express story, and it turned out they all came from this NASA press release. And the source of the NASA press release was this paper, which was published in 2015. People often ask me how to track down sources, and that's how it's done. Now all we have to do is see how the information has changed along the way, just like the old telephone game, or what we call in the book Chinese whispers. Well, the press release reported the conclusions of the paper accurately, so no change there. And here's the Express story, with the material copied and pasted verbatim from the NASA press release highlighted in yellow. So that's all accurate. What's interesting are the bits in between, the bits of the press release that for some reason the Express decided to change. Let's start with the headline. The title of the NASA paper was Implications for Climate Sensitivity from the Response to Individual Forcings. The NASA press release headline was NASA Study Examination of Earth's Recent History Key to Predicting Global Temperatures. And let's see what headline the Express decided to run with. Climate Change Shock. Burning Fossil Fuels Cools Planet, says NASA. And Crowder echoed the Sunday Express line. NASA now says burning fossil fuels cools the planet. Beginning to see the difference. Let's go to more detail about this alleged cooling. According to the paper, forcings that project more strongly on the northern hemisphere, land or polar regions are systematically more effective at changing temperatures than an equivalent amount of CO2 whose forcing is more uniformly distributed throughout the globe. The press release says, because earlier studies do not account for what amounts to a net cooling effect for part of the northern hemisphere, predictions for TCR and X have been lower than they should be. Now, how does the Sunday Express change that? It goes with, NASA found a net cooling in the northern hemisphere due to industrial activity. And Crowder says, the latest talking point to march to its death, fossil fuels cause global warming because they don't. In fact, NASA says fossil fuels actually cause temporary global cooling. So we've gone from aerosols causing net cooling in parts of the northern hemisphere to causing net cooling in the northern hemisphere to causing temporary cooling across the entire planet. And from that, let's call it a misunderstanding, Crowder concludes that fossil fuels don't cause global warming. If Crowder had checked the tabloid newspaper source, instead of simply believing what it said, he would have discovered the error and not embellished it with completely the wrong conclusion. What probably confused the Sunday Express and Crowder is that this may be the first time they've learned that some types of fossil fuels produce sulfate aerosols, and that these aerosols reflect sunlight and therefore have a cooling effect. This was mentioned by NASA because it's what prompted this study, but of course it wasn't the conclusion of this study. After all, the cooling effect of aerosols has been known for decades, and I've even talked about it in my videos. If you burn high sulfur fossil fuels, you get a lot of sulfate pollution known as aerosols, and this pollution mitigates the warming effect of CO2. If you switch to cleaner fuels like natural gas, which doesn't produce so many sulfates, the aerosols very quickly get washed out of the atmosphere. The air clears and you feel the full effects of CO2-induced warming. Several papers have tried to quantify the effect of aerosols, and the NASA paper was simply doing that using a more accurate method. What it found was that previous studies had underestimated the cooling effect of aerosols, and that means the underlying warming effect of CO2 must be much greater than was previously calculated. Here's what the NASA study said. This has been rewritten quite accurately by the press release as because earlier studies do not account for what amounts to a net cooling effect for parts of the northern hemisphere. Predictions for Tkur and X have been lower than they should be. The Express changed that too. Existing climate change models have underestimated what the future impact on global temperatures will be. The Express makes it sound as though other climate models haven't taken the cooling effect of aerosols into account, and therefore the Earth is not going to warm as much as we thought. That's certainly the impression Crowder got. For years we heard burning fossil fuels caused global warming, but now they've found that, oops, no, we mean cooling. In fact, the NASA paper and the NASA press release make it clear that their conclusion is the complete opposite. Burning fossil fuels actually causes more warming than we thought. I know, again, a lot of Crowder fans will write in refusing to believe that he could have drawn completely the opposite conclusion to the conclusion of the NASA study he didn't read. Well, Crowder always encourages his fans to engage in critical thinking, so if you don't believe what I'm showing you, that's good. Do some critical thinking and read the blog, read the newspaper, the press release, and the study for yourselves. All my sources are in the video description. While I was making this video, Crowder posted yet another fallacy on his blog, and while I was checking and correcting that one, yet another one popped up. It's hard to keep up, but let's deal with this one first. Crowder fell for a phony mail on Sunday's story that claimed a whistleblower had exposed a fiddling of figures by NOAA. I've done a video on this already, and just a minimal amount of checking brought me to this. It's an article written by the supposed whistleblower John Bates just a few days before the Mail story was published. In it he outlined in detail what his grievances were, and they all had to do with the way NOAA archived its material. Not one mention of fiddling the data. That all seems to have come from Mail reporter David Rose, who has a history of getting his facts and his quotes wrong. Even after the Mail story was published, Bates again said NOAA had not fiddled the figures. Not only did the Mail get that wrong, it tried to substantiate it with its own made-up graph, putting the NOAA results on a different baseline to imply that their results showed a different temperature trend to other temperature monitoring bodies. But, in fact, NOAA's temperature trend is exactly the same as other temperature monitoring bodies around the world. It's really not that hard to find this stuff out. Crowder not only believed the Mail story without question, he even copied the misleading graph. They even copied the misleading real without used And he also copied, without verifying, the Mail's claim that this was done just before the Paris Climate Agreement in order to influence it. In fact, the magazine that published the NOAA results, Science, told Mail on Sunday reporter David Rose that it took 6 months to peer review the information. Crowder always advocates critical thinking, which I certainly endorse. But the critical thinking in this case seems to be, I read it in the Mail, so it must be true, so it's okay to tell me readers it's true. It's a shame no one warned him that the Daily Mail is in the habit of publishing questionable quotes and spurious stories. Well, this guy tried too. In February, this alert was posted showing that the Daily Mail had published a phony story about Neil Gorsuch. If only Crowder had seen it, he might have thought twice about trusting something he read in the Mail. So who exposed the Mail as a purveyor of fake news? And this other thing got posted claiming that, surprise, study shows climate change likely not man-made. Claiming that it is studied show and a link to this paper. Now look at this headline. What do you think it's saying? Like me, you probably assume it means that a scientific paper has shown that the recent rise in global temperature is not man-made, contrary to all scientific opinion. And that seems to be echoed in the body of the piece. These scientists have concluded that the climate change has very little to do with humans. But no, it turns out that the climate change is referring to another period of climate change, only that happened thousands of years ago while humans were still banging rocks together. So a more accurate headline would be, Scientific Study Shows Climate Change Before the Appearance of Modern Man Not Man-Made. Totally unsurprising. Team Crowder found something else in the paper that was clearly new to them. Their theory implies that the Earth has been transmorphing for a while now and will continue to do so. I presume they think the word transmorphing means changing climate rather than changing shape. So does the paper imply that the Earth's climate has always changed and will continue to do so. Yes, it not only implies that, it takes it for granted, as does every other paper that's been written on the subject of geology for the last 200 years. Of course, the Earth's climate's always been changing. If you were wondering how and why the climate could have changed before humans came along, I've explained that in me video, climate changes could natural, and the 800-year lag explained. It has to do with changing levels of carbon dioxide. So what was the conclusion of the paper? Well, it wasn't that humans weren't responsible for climate change during the Stone Age. I think we already knew that. And it wasn't that humans aren't responsible for climate change now, because the paper never discussed that. And it wasn't that the Earth's climate has always changed, because we knew that too. No, the conclusion of the paper, get ready for it, is that there was a decreasing trend for increases in insolation to lead to deglaciations during the Quaternary. I know, sounds rather dull, but that's why the paper didn't get anyone excited except Team Crowder, who obviously never read the conclusion. And they obviously never read this bit either, which says that one of the factors that led to strong warming at the end of each quaternary glaciation was carbon dioxide. So the paper endorses the very theory Team Crowder seems to think it overturns. All these errors come on top of Crowder's other errors about climate science, all that he already covered, such as his claim that falling polar bear numbers are a myth, his claim that ice sheets aren't melting, his claim that only 3% of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere comes from anthropogenic sources. Check me video descriptions for the links and all me sources. The first time he fact-checked Crowder, a lot of his fans got very upset. Brought in a number of people who told me I'd missed the point of his top 5 myths video, but then couldn't agree on what the point was. A lot of them claimed his video wasn't about the top 5 climate myths, it was about politics. Even though top 5 climate myths was the title of the video, and each of the 5 myths was clearly spelled out. Others say the point is that these 5 myths are left-wing fallacies. But as I explained in my response, they re not left-wing fallacies or even right-wing fallacies. They re either unknown and therefore plausible, or they re scientific facts. If he'd made left-wing fallacies his top climate change myths, then I would have applauded him. Because whether they come from left-wingers or right-wingers, bullshit is bullshit, and it needs to be corrected. What a shame he didn't choose any of these left-wing fallacies as his top 5 climate myths, because he tackled quite a few of them. Another common message from his fans is that Crowder isn't saying man-made climate change is false. Sorry, but that's exactly what he's saying. Unless you want to assume that because he's a comedian, he's saying the opposite to what he actually thinks. And that's another argument. He's a comedian, so it's okay, doesn't excuse the spreading of inaccurate information, either for Crowder or anyone else. So now we come to the question, why won't I debate him? The problem is Crowder's fans are once again unquestioningly believing what they read on Crowder's website, which as we've seen is not always a good idea. The answer is I've offered to do just that. I'm sure Crowder's just misremembering our exchange. After I wrote me first response to Steve Crowder and his 5 top climate change myths, he said some of me criticisms were valid and others weren't. And I responded by asking him to point out the invalid criticisms, either on me channel or on his. I was, and still am, happy to debate him. It was Crowder who never responded. As for going on his show, I responded to that invitation by saying it was possible. Well, here's a copy of the email I sent to his producer, Jared. As for the offer of going on the program, it's possible, but a pain in the arse trying to coordinate times, especially since I am on assignment most of the time and around 12 hours away from key zones. But I'm sure we can resolve this very easily if you just tell me how I misrepresented your position with supporting evidence. I will then have time to check your evidence and write a response. Science isn't a matter of opinion, but a matter of facts. And either you got your facts wrong, or I did. If I got me facts wrong, I will be delighted to have them corrected. I still don't know what these differences are because I still don't know which of me corrections Crowder accepts and which he doesn't. So I am still waiting for a response. Steve, My invitation for you to respond on your channel or mine still stands, and here are the claims you made that I dispute. So pick which ones you accept were wrong and which ones you still stand by. Let's pin you down. Off the claims you still stand by, I'll pick one and we'll debate it. Not all of them at once, because pinning you down means sticking to a subject instead of you or I trying to pivot whenever the going gets tough. I've rebutted you by quoting your own sources. So if I am wrong, then either I've misrepresented your sources or you have some other sources that support your claim. If you have, tell me what they are and I'll check them. If you rather do this on air, fine, but I'm in-laws at the moment and then I'm in Korea and Taiwan, so we won't be back home until September. So let's start the debate on your channel or mine, and then when I'm back in Australia I can phone your show. But even if we do this on air, the same rules apply. We can't simply make up facts and shout them at one another. Agreed. If we cite facts and figures, we have to say where they come from and give the other person time to check them. I know that doesn't make great radio, but play some music or something. I think most intelligent people want to know whose facts are right and whose facts are bogus, so they would appreciate a calm joint appraisal of the papers you recited rather than a shouting match where neither of us is held accountable. Let's engage in something you always advocate, critical thinking, rather than just slinging made-up facts at one another. Agreed.